Maliya's eyes fluttered shut. She knew she should move. Should stand up, smooth down her dress, walk out of this room and never look back. But Kim Jun-seo's fingers were still resting against her lap. Slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world and every right to touch her exactly like that. And her body had stopped listening to reason the moment he sat down beside her. She hated that. She hated him. Or at least she was supposed to. Because the man beside her was not just any man. He was her boss. Cold, untouchable, the kind of powerful that made entire boardrooms go quiet when he walked in. He was the man her best friend had been in love with for months. The man Yemi talked about with stars in her eyes and hope in her voice. The man Maliya had smiled and nodded about more times than she could count. And he was the man Maliya had sworn, to herself, in the mirror, on every sane morning she could remember, to stay far, far away from. So she had no business being here. No business letting his hand rest where it did. No business feeling what she felt. But what Maliya did not know, what she could not have known, was that this was not the beginning. She had already given herself to this man once before. Just not like this. Not in the light. Not knowing his name. Seoul did not care about Maliya Adeyemi. She had figured that out early, somewhere between her third week of boarding the wrong subway line and the morning a woman at a convenience store spoke to her in rapid Korean, waited, and then turned away without bothering to repeat herself. Hanad, the city moved fast, and it moved loud, and it had absolutely no interest in slowing down for a 24-year-old Nigerian girl with a scholarship, a cramped studio apartment, and no clear idea what she was doing here. But she stayed, because going back felt like failing, and Maliya had done enough of that quietly, in ways nobody noticed, to know she could not survive doing it loudly. She pulled her coat tighter every morning as she walked through the glass doors of KJ Group's main building, bag on one shoulder, earphones in, not playing anything, just there as a wall between herself and the world. She took her usual spot at the back of the elevator, without thinking about it. She was good at the back of things, the back of the elevator, the back of meetings, the back of every room she walked into, standing just visible enough that nobody could say she was not there, but never far enough forward that anyone actually had to deal with her. Her best friend called it hiding. Maliya called it surviving. Yemi was already at her desk every morning by the time Maliya arrived, turned sideways in her chair, coffee cup in both hands, watching Maliya the way she always did, like Maliya was a puzzle she was personally offended by. Yemi was beautiful in the way that filled rooms. Dark skin, natural hair pinned up and slightly escaping on one side, bright eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She was the kind of person Seoul had immediately made space for. Warm, funny, magnetic in that effortless way that made people want to orbit her. Maliya had loved her for it, had also, quietly, resented it for approximately the same amount of time. Not in a way she was proud of, just in the small, honest way you resent someone who makes existing look easy when it has never once felt easy for you. They had met in their first month in Korea, two black girls in the same graduate program, gravitating toward each other the way people do when they are far from home, and the world around them does not quite make sense yet. Yemi had taken Maliya's hand the night they met at an orientation dinner and said she looked like she needed a friend. And Maliya, who had not realized until that moment how desperately true that was, had laughed and said yes. That was 18 months ago. Now they worked side by side at KJ Group's marketing department. Yemi loud and luminous, and somehow already on first-name terms with half the floor. And Maliya quiet and capable, and largely unremarkable to anyone who was not paying close attention. Nobody was ever paying close attention. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, when Yemi leaned over and told her, in a lowered voice that carried far more weight than it should have, that Kim Jun-seo was sitting in on the 10 o'clock presentation. Maliya's hands stilled over her keyboard. He never sat in on department presentations. He was the CEO. He had an entire executive floor and a calendar so tightly managed that his assistant communicated in 15-minute blocks. His presence at a mid-level marketing review meant something, and it was not something comfortable. Yemi said she had heard Director Choi mention he was reviewing every department personally, looking for weak points. So then her voice shifted, softened in that particular way it did whenever the conversation moved toward him, and she mentioned, almost as an aside, that she had seen him in the lobby that morning, that he had held the elevator, that he had not said a word, just stood there, and that somehow that had been worse than if he had spoken. Maliya turned back to her screen and said nothing. She had learned 3 months ago that there was nothing useful to say when Yemi's voice did that. Kim Jun-seo arrived at the presentation at exactly 10 o'clock. Not 1 minute early. Not 1 minute late. He walked in the way he always did, like the room had been expecting him, and had simply been waiting to become relevant until he entered it. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. He took a seat at the far end of the table, opened the folder in front of him, and said nothing to anyone. The 3-person presenting team visibly stiffened. Maliya stood at the side of the room. She was not presenting. She was there as support, which meant she was there in the background, which meant she was exactly where she was most comfortable. She watched him the way she sometimes allowed herself to in moments like this, carefully, from enough distance that it did not mean anything. She watched the way he read. Quickly, precisely, like he was not just absorbing information, but already categorizing it, deciding what it was worth before the presenter had finished making the point. She did not think about his jaw the way Yemi did. She thought he looked like someone who made decisions that redirected the course of other people's lives, and then went home and slept without any difficulty at all. The presentation ran smoothly for 15 minutes. Then the senior associate put up the 3rd slide, and Jun-seo looked up and asked, quietly, where the projected Q3 engagement figure came from. The associate explained it was extrapolated from the previous quarter's growth trend. Jun-seo said a single quarter was not a trend. He said it without cruelty, without raising his voice, with the flat certainty of someone stating something they considered obvious. He told him to pull the number, rebuild the projection from at least 3 quarters of data, account for the Q2 seasonal dip, and have it revised by end of day. He said the figure on the screen would not survive 5 minutes in front of the board. The associate nodded quickly and said, of course, right away, absolutely. Jun-seo looked back down at his folder. Maliya exhaled slowly and looked away from him, and caught, in the half-second before she fully turned, that his eyes had lifted from the page and landed on her. Not on the presenter, not on the slide, on her. She looked down at her notebook. It lasted less than 2 seconds. It meant nothing. She told herself that quietly and repeatedly for the rest of the morning, the way you repeat something that you almost believe. The thing about feeling invisible was that it was not always dramatic. Most of the time, it was just quiet. It was saying something in the middle of a conversation and watching everyone move forward as though you had not spoken. It was standing in the break room while 2 colleagues talked comfortably around you. Not unkindly, just around you, the way people talk around furniture they have stopped noticing. It was going home at the end of the day, carrying that particular low-grade exhaustion that came from spending 8 hours performing the idea of being present. Maliya had felt it long before Seoul. She had felt it at university in Lagos, at family gatherings where her mother introduced her with that barely-there hesitation before remembering which accomplishment to mention. In every room where someone louder walked in and the air simply shifted toward them, the way it always did with Yemi, the way it apparently did with Kim Jun-seo. How she had gotten used to it. She sat on the floor of her apartment that evening, her back against the foot of her bed, laptop open to a report she was not reading, and she turned over those 2 seconds in the meeting room one more time before setting them aside for good. He had looked at everyone at some point. She was a file. Unremarkable. Already closed. Her phone buzzed. It was Yemi, saying she needed to tell Maliya something, and that Maliya was absolutely not allowed to judge her. Maliya told her she would absolutely judge her. Yemi ignored that and said he had smiled at her in the hallway after the meeting. Not a big smile, small, brief. But the way she described it made it clear that small smile had done considerable damage to her composure, and she was not sure she had fully recovered. Maliya told her to drink water, lie down, and remember that he was their boss. Yemi said that was exactly what made it worse, also possibly better. Then she said goodnight, said she loved her, and asked Maliya please not to let her do anything stupid. Maliya set her phone face down on the carpet. She sat in the quiet of her small apartment, the city humming its indifferent hum 14 floors below, and she thought, not for the first time, but more clearly than she ever had before, about what it would feel like to be someone else for a single night. Not Maliya Adeyemi, support staff, background presence, the girl nobody looked at twice. Just someone who got looked at, someone who got chosen. She did not act on the thought, not yet. It started with a bad week, not dramatically bad, not the kind of bad that came with a clear cause and a clear ending. So just the slow, accumulating kind, the kind that settled into your bones and made everything feel slightly heavier than it should. On Monday, Maliya submitted a campaign proposal she had spent 3 weeks building. By Wednesday, it had been absorbed into a larger project under a senior associate's name, with no mention of where the original framework came from. She sat in the meeting where it was presented and smiled and said nothing, because she did not know how to say something without her voice betraying exactly how small it made her feel. On Thursday, she overheard 2 colleagues in the break room talking about the department's quiet ones, the people who showed up, did the work, and never quite distinguished themselves. She did not hear her name. She did not need to. On Friday evening, she sat at her desk long after everyone else had left and stared at the city through the 14th floor window and felt, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, that she was disappearing. Not all at once, just slowly, the way things disappear when nobody is watching. She took the long way home. She was not looking for anything. She told herself that later, many times, as though the telling could make it true. She was just walking through the back streets of Itaewon, where the city got louder and stranger and less concerned with appearances, when she saw the woman. She was standing outside what looked like an unmarked door set into a dark wall, dressed in all black, holding a small card between 2 fingers. She looked at Maliya the way very few people ever looked at her, directly, unhurriedly, like she had been expected. She held out the card. Maliya took it without fully deciding to. It was matte black with a single gold emblem pressed into the center, a lotus. Below it, in small, clean letters, an address and a time. Nothing else, no name, no explanation. The woman said it was by invitation only. She said the dress code was formal and the mask was not optional. She said what happened inside stayed inside, and that was not a warning. It was a promise. Maliya looked at the card for a long moment. Then she put it in her coat pocket and went home. She told herself she was not going to go. She told herself that for 2 days. On Sunday evening, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror in a dress she had bought in Lagos 3 years ago and never worn. Deep burgundy, fitted, so the kind of dress that belonged to a version of herself she had never quite had the nerve to be. And she looked at her own reflection for a long time. She thought about the campaign proposal with someone else's name on it. She thought about the break room conversation she was never meant to hear. She thought about 2 seconds in a meeting room that meant nothing. She picked up the mask she had bought that afternoon, black, simple, covering everything from her forehead to just below her cheekbones. And she put it on. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the woman in the mirror looked back at her like she was someone worth looking at. She went. The address led her to a building in Gangnam that had no signage, no visible entrance from the street, and a man at a discreet side door who looked at her card. She looked at her and stepped aside without a word. She followed a narrow corridor lit in deep amber, the sound of something low and intoxicating growing as she walked, until she stepped through a second door and the world changed entirely. The Black Lotus room was not what she had imagined. She had imagined something dark and chaotic, something that felt dangerous in an obvious way. But it was not that at all. It was vast and dim and achingly beautiful. Deep jewel tones, low lighting that turned every surface gold, music that moved through the air like something alive. The people here were dressed impeccably, faces half hidden behind masks of every kind, moving and talking and existing with a freedom that felt almost surreal. Nobody looked at each other with the weight of the outside world. Nobody here was a job title or a quiet one or a background presence. Maliya stood just inside the entrance and felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had been carrying so long she had stopped noticing it. She found a seat at the curved bar along the far wall and ordered something she did not recognize on the menu because she liked the sound of the name, and she sat and she breathed, and she let herself simply exist in a room without shrinking. She did not notice him immediately. She felt him first. That was the only way she could describe it afterward, a shift in the atmosphere on her left side, a stillness that somehow made itself known above the music and the movement and the low murmur of conversation. She turned slowly, and he was there. He was sitting 2 seats from her at the bar, turned slightly in her direction. And even behind the mask, dark, sharp, covering the upper half of his face, the presence he carried was impossible to ignore. He was dressed in all black, no drink in front of him, just watching the room with the particular stillness of someone who was entirely accustomed to being the most powerful thing in any space he occupied. He was not looking at the room when she turned. He was looking at her. Maliya held his gaze for 1 second longer than she intended to. Then she looked away, reached for her glass, and reminded herself to breathe. She felt him move before she saw it. He closed the distance between them, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving with the same quiet certainty with which he seemed to do everything, and sat down beside her. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a name. He simply settled into the seat beside her, like he had decided something and saw no reason to explain the decision. Then he said, in a low voice, that she felt more than heard, that she looked like someone who had been waiting a long time to take up space. Maliya turned to look at him. She said she did not know what that meant. He said yes, she did. She should have moved her seat, should have picked up her glass and found another corner of the room and put enough distance between herself and this masked stranger to think clearly. Every sensible instinct she had pointed in that direction. She stayed. They talked for a long time, or something that passed for talking in a place like this, where real names did not exist, and the outside world had agreed, collectively, to wait at the door. He asked her questions nobody had ever thought to ask her. Not about her job or her program or how long she had been in Korea. He asked her what she wanted, what she was afraid of, what she would do if she knew for certain nobody was watching. Maliya answered him honestly, which surprised her, because she had not come here to be honest. She had come here to disappear, but something about the mask, about the strange mercy of anonymity, made honesty feel safe in a way it never did in daylight. She asked him questions back. He answered some of them and deflected others with a small smile she could see even behind the mask, and she found, somewhere in the middle of it, that she had stopped thinking about the outside world entirely. He gave her one rule before the night was over. He said it quietly, lying with a certainty that did not ask for a response. Only me. She should have questioned that, should have laughed or pushed back, or reminded him that she did not even know his name. She did not do any of those things. She looked at him in the amber light of the Black Lotus room, this masked stranger who had looked at her across a room full of people and chosen her, who had sat beside her and asked her what she wanted like the answer genuinely mattered, and she felt something she had spent years convincing herself she did not need. She felt seen. She felt wanted. She felt, for the first time in longer than she could count, like she was standing in the front of a room instead of the back. The night ended the way nights like that ended. Not with answers, not with names, not with anything that would survive the daylight. Just the memory of being chosen. Just the rule he had given her, sitting quietly in her chest, like something warm. Only me. She walked home alone through the early morning streets of Seoul, her mask in her bag, her heels in her hand, and she felt like someone who had just remembered something important about herself. She did not know his name. He had not asked for her face, and neither of them had any idea what they had just started. Monday morning arrived the way Monday mornings always did, indifferent, fluorescent, smelling of coffee, and the particular quiet tension of people who would rather be anywhere else. Maliya walked through the glass doors of KJ Group with her bag on one shoulder and her earphones in and absolutely nothing on her face that suggested her entire interior world had shifted 3 days ago in a room full of masked strangers. She was good at that, keeping things off her face. She took the elevator to the 14th floor, sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and began the work of being unremarkable. Yemi arrived 7 minutes later, dropped into her chair, and immediately turned to look at Maliya with the focused intensity of someone who had been storing up conversation since Friday. She said the weekend had been eventful. She said she had gone to some rooftop thing in Hongdae with people from the finance floor, and that it had been fine, but not the point. The point, she said, leaning forward, was that she had been doing research? Maliya asked what kind of research. Yemi said the Kim Jun-seo kind. She pulled out her phone and began talking about the companies he had built before KJ Group, about the profile a business magazine had run on him 2 years ago, about the fact that he had studied abroad in London for 3 years in his mid-20s, and that she felt this was relevant information. She said he was 31. She said she had done the math, and the age gap was completely reasonable. Maliya listened to all of this with her eyes on her screen and a carefully neutral expression on her face. She did not think about amber light. She did not think about a low voice asking her what she would do if she knew nobody was watching. She said that was a lot of research for someone she called completely off-limits. Lin Yemi said off-limits and uninterested were two very different things, and that she had never once claimed to be uninterested. Then she smiled. That wide, easy smile that had always made Maliya feel warm. The smile that had made her say yes to friendship in a strange city 18 months ago. And she said she was going to make him notice her. She said it lightly, like a joke, but her eyes said something else entirely. Her eyes said she had already decided. Maliya turned back to her screen and said nothing. She went back to the Black Lotus room the following Saturday. She told herself it was just to feel that loosening in her chest again, that specific relief of existing somewhere without the weight of being herself. She told herself it had nothing to do with him. She sat at the same curved bar and ordered something different, and looked at the room and felt the music move through her and waited for nothing in particular. He was there within 20 minutes. She did not see him arrive. He was simply not there, and then he was, settling into the seat beside her with the same unhurried certainty as the first night, like the 2 weeks of ordinary life between this moment and the last one had not happened at all. He said he was glad she came back. She said she almost did not. He said he knew. Then he said he had thought about her. Maliya looked at him for a moment. She asked how he could have thought about her when he did not know anything about her. He said he knew enough. She asked what that meant. He turned to face her fully then. And even behind the mask, the directness of his attention was something she felt physically. A warmth, a weight, a deliberateness that made the rest of the room recede. He said he knew she was braver than she let the world see. He said he knew she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He said he knew that whatever she was running from when she first walked into this room, she had not fully decided yet whether to keep running or turn around and face it. Maliya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that was uncomfortably accurate for someone who did not know her name. He smiled. She was getting used to that smile, the small, controlled version of it that appeared at the edges of his mouth when she said something that surprised him. He said names were just the thing people used to file each other away. He said he did not want to file her. She stayed until the room began to empty. They talked, and they did not talk, and there was something between the talking and the silence that felt more honest than most conversations Maliya had managed in her entire adult life. When the night ended, he walked her to the corridor and stopped there, and she could feel him watching her as she left, and she carried that feeling home like something precious and fragile that she did not want to examine too closely in the light. She did not examine it. She went back the following Saturday, and the one after that. At work, things were shifting in ways that were difficult to name. It started small. Yemi began wearing different things to the office. Quieter colors, more structured cuts, the kind of careful dressing that suggested an audience in mind. She started arriving earlier, leaving later, finding reasons to be visible on the executive corridor in ways that required a certain amount of creative calendar management. Maliya noticed. She said nothing. Then, one Thursday morning, Seo came down to the 14th floor for a departmental review, something he had been doing with increasing frequency across all departments as part of whatever internal audit had been driving his presence in their spaces. And the temperature of the room changed the way it always did when he walked into it. Maliya was standing at the printer when he arrived. She gathered her documents, turned around, and found him 3 feet away, reading something on his phone, blocking the narrow path between the printer station and the main floor. She said, "Excuse me," quietly. He looked up. For a moment, just a moment, something moved across his expression. Not the boardroom neutrality she was used to. Something else. Something that arrived and disappeared so quickly she could not be certain she had seen it at all. He stepped aside without a word. She walked past him and did not look back, and sat down at her desk and stared at her screen for a full minute before she remembered what she had gone to the printer for. That evening, Yemi stayed late. Maliya was packing up her bag when she noticed Yemi, still at her desk, turned toward the glass partition that looked out onto the executive corridor, watching the light in Seo's corner office with an expression that was not the warm, joking lovesickness Maliya had grown used to. It was something more fixed than that, more patient. The expression of someone who was not hoping for something but waiting for it. Maliya looked at her for a moment. Then she said goodnight and left. The weeks moved like that, 2 lives running in parallel, never quite touching. By day, she was Maliya Adeyemi, unremarkable, invisible, standing at the back of rooms. By night, in the amber light of the Black Lotus room, she was something else entirely. A woman with a rule sitting quietly in her chest, and a masked stranger who looked at her like she was the only person in a room full of people. She was careful. She was so careful. She did not think about him at work. She did not look for him in hallways or meeting rooms or the lobby on her way in. She kept the 2 worlds completely separate in her mind. 2 different people, 2 different lives. No overlap. While what she did not know was that one of those worlds already knew about the other. It was the 5th Saturday when everything tilted. He was already at the bar when she arrived, and something was different about him that night. Not distant, not cold, but quieter than usual, carrying something he had not brought before. She sat beside him and did not ask immediately. She had learned that he came to things in his own time. Eventually, he said that his world was complicated in ways he had not chosen and could not fully explain. He said there were people around him who wanted things from him that had nothing to do with who he was and everything to do with what he controlled. He said he was tired of rooms where everyone had an agenda. Maliya said she understood rooms where everyone had an agenda. He looked at her then and said she was the only place he came where that was not true. She felt that land somewhere deep and unguarded. She felt it settle. She told herself, on the walk home that night, that she was being careful, that this was contained, that 2 people in masks in a room that did not exist in the daylight could not hurt anyone. She told herself that. She almost believed it. What she did not know, what she could not have seen, was that 3 days earlier, on a Wednesday evening, Yemi had followed her. Not to the Black Lotus room. Not that far. Just far enough to see which direction Maliya went on the nights she came home late. Just far enough to notice the dress under the coat, the mask in the bag. the particular glow that Maliya carried back from wherever she had been. Yemi had always been observant. It was one of the things Maliya had loved about her. She had not understood, until now, that observation and surveillance were sometimes the same thing. Yemi said nothing. She filed it away with the careful patience of someone who already knew that information, handled correctly, was the most powerful thing in any room. She smiled at Maliya the next morning over coffee the way she always had, warm, easy, like a best friend. Maliya smiled back. Neither of them said anything, but the ground had already started to shift beneath them both. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Kim Jun-seo figured it out. Not all at once, not in a single blinding moment of revelation. It came the way most truths came, quietly, in pieces, each one small enough to dismiss on its own until they were not. It started with her voice. When he had been in the marketing department for a review meeting, the third one that month, part of the audit that had been pulling him through every floor of the building with a thoroughness that was starting to wear on his calendar and his patience. The meeting had run long. Most of the room had contributed the expected things. Safe observations, carefully worded suggestions designed to sound bold without actually risking anything. Then, Maliya had spoken. She did not raise her hand, did not clear her throat or signal in any way that she was about to say something. She simply said it. A quiet, precise observation about the campaign's target demographic that reframed the entire direction of the conversation in about 40 words. Then she stopped, like she had not done anything remarkable, and looked back down at her notes. The room moved on. But Jun-seo did not move on. He looked at her for a moment longer than the room required. Something about the cadence of it, the way she built the thought, the particular rhythm of how she said what she meant without decoration, pulled at something at the edge of his memory. He let it go, or he tried to. It came back on Thursday. He was crossing the lobby on his way to a car that was already waiting when he saw her at the building entrance, struggling briefly with her bag strap and her umbrella, and the door all at the same time, and she made a small sound of frustration under her breath. A barely audible exhale, more feeling than word, and something in him stopped completely. He had heard that sound before. He had heard it in the amber light of the Black Lotus room on the third Saturday, once when she had knocked her glass slightly and caught it before it tipped and made that exact sound. That quiet, unguarded exhale of someone who was used to managing small disasters alone. He held the door. She looked up, registered who was holding it, and went very still for just a fraction of a second before she composed herself and said thank you and walked through. He watched her go. He stood there in the lobby of his own building for longer than was reasonable, and he thought about a woman in a burgundy dress and a black mask who had looked at him across a room full of people like she was surprised to be seen. He thought about the way she sat at a bar, slightly turned inward, like she was protecting something. He thought about the way she talked, careful at first, then honest in a way that had caught him completely off guard, then honest in a way that had kept him coming back every Saturday for weeks. He thought about her hands, the way she held a glass. He looked at the elevator Maliya had just stepped into. He thought about Maliya's hands. He took the stairs to his office, closed the door, and sat at his desk without opening his laptop. He was certain by Friday. He did not know how to feel about it. That was the part that surprised him. Not the discovery itself, but the fact that his first response was not the cold, cataloging assessment he brought to every other piece of information that crossed his desk. His first response was something warmer and more complicated than that. Something that sat in his chest and refused to be filed. He had chosen her in that room full of people because she was the only one who looked like she had not come to perform. Because she held herself like someone carrying a weight she had never told anyone about. Because something in him had recognized something in her before he had spoken a single word. And then he had spent weeks talking to her in the dark, learning the shape of how she thought, the specific geography of what she carried, the particular courage it took for someone like her to walk into a room like that at all. And he had given her a rule he had never given anyone, had meant it in a way he had not fully examined until now. Only me. And she had been 3 feet away from him every single day. He pulled up her employee file, read it once, briefly, then closed it. The file told him almost nothing about her. That did not surprise him. The things worth knowing about Maliya Adeyemi did not live in a file. He did not go to the Black Lotus room that Saturday. He needed to think, needed to understand what he was going to do with what he knew before he did anything with it, because he was not a man who acted without understanding the full shape of a situation first. He thought about the way she had said she was fine in a tone that meant something else. He thought about the campaign proposal 3 weeks ago that had appeared under a senior associate's name. He had noticed that, had filed it, had not yet decided what to do about it. He thought about the fact that his quiet, invisible support staff member was the same woman who had told him, in a room full of strangers, that she was tired of living in a way that nobody noticed. He thought about Yemi. That was the complication he had been aware of for months. The warm, magnetic colleague who had made her interest known in a dozen small, careful ways that he had neither encouraged nor directly shut down, mostly because it had not felt urgent enough to address. He had been aware of it the way he was aware of most things, clearly, neutrally, without particular concern. It felt more urgent now, because now it was not just a colleague's misplaced interest. Now it sat directly across from something he was realizing, with a clarity that was almost inconvenient, that he actually wanted. He went back the following Saturday. She was already there when he arrived, sitting at the bar in a deep green dress this time, her mask in place, her posture carrying that particular quality she had, upright but inward, like she was bracing for something she could not name. She turned when he sat down, and something in her face did what it always did. Relaxed, just slightly, in a way he did not think she was aware of. He said he had missed her last week. She said she had noticed. He asked if she had come anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said yes. She said she had sat at the bar for an hour and then gone home, and that she had been annoyed at herself for staying as long as she had. He said he was sorry. She said she did not need him to be sorry. She just needed him to not do it again. He looked at her. He said all right. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the music moving around them, and he thought about how strange it was to know someone's face and not be able to tell them that he knew it. To sit beside her in the dark, with the full weight of what he knew, and say nothing. He was going to have to tell her. Not tonight. Not yet. He needed to understand what it meant first. For him, for her, for the impossible geometry of what they were to each other in 2 completely different worlds. But soon, what he did not know, what neither of them knew, was that soon was already too late. At work the following week, something changed in Yemi. It was subtle at first. Small things. She stopped turning to Maliya in the mornings with her coffee and her observations. Not coldly. Yemi was never cold. She was too controlled for that. But the warmth had a different quality to it now. A slight distance, like a door left open just enough that you could not call it closed. Maliya noticed. She was always noticing things nobody thought she noticed. She told herself it was nothing, that Yemi was busy, distracted, caught up in whatever project had been pulling her attention for the past 2 weeks. Then, on Wednesday, she walked past the small conference room on the executive corridor and saw Yemi inside. Alone, with Jun Seo. Not a formal meeting. The table was empty of documents, no laptops open, no other attendees. Just Yemi sitting across from him with her hands folded and her best smile in place, talking with the focused, deliberate warmth of someone who had prepared for exactly this conversation. Jun Seo was listening. His expression gave nothing away, the way it never did. Maliya walked past. She did not slow down, did not stop. Just walked past with her documents in her hand and her face completely composed, and went back to her desk and sat down and opened her laptop and stared at the screen. She felt something she did not immediately have a name for. It took her a moment to identify it because it arrived wrapped in so many other things: guilt and confusion, and a kind of hollow ache she did not think she had earned the right to feel. She was jealous. She sat with that for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she closed it, pressed it down, reminded herself with firm, deliberate clarity that she had no claim on Kim Jun-seo. Not the one at work, cold and authoritative, and entirely out of reach. Not the one in the Black Lotus room, masked and close and impossibly honest. She had no claim on either version of him. She had a rule, just a rule, that was all. Yemi came back to her desk 20 minutes later and said nothing about the meeting. She sat down, opened her laptop, and started typing with the calm, satisfied energy of someone who felt a plan was progressing. Maliya watched her from the corner of her eye. She thought about the door that was still open, just enough that you could not call it closed. That evening, she received a message from a number she did not recognize. It was brief. It said that she should be careful about who she spent time with in private, that certain associations could complicate her visa status and her employment, that it was friendly advice. She read it 3 times. Then she put her phone down on the kitchen counter and stood very still for a moment. She did not know who had sent it, but she felt, with a cold and sudden clarity, that she knew the direction it had come from. She did not sleep well that night. On Friday, she was called into Director Choi's office. He was a small, careful man who communicated almost entirely in euphemisms and had never once looked directly at her in the 18 months she had worked at KJ Group. He sat behind his desk and said there had been some concerns raised. He said it carefully, the way he said everything, not naming the concerns, not naming who had raised them, just letting the words sit there in the space between them. He said there was a question about the Q3 proposal she had submitted, about whether the framework had been developed independently or whether it had drawn too heavily from existing department resources in a way that had not been properly attributed. Maliya looked at him for a long moment. She said the proposal had been entirely her own work. He said he was sure that was the case, and that it was probably nothing, and that these things just needed to be looked into when they were raised. She said she understood. She walked back to her desk and sat down and opened her laptop and thought, with a cold precision that surprised her, about who at KJ Group would have known enough about that proposal to raise a question about it. One name arrived. She looked at Yemi's empty chair. She thought about the warmth that had always felt like sunlight, about the girl who had taken her hand at an orientation dinner and said she looked like she needed a friend. She thought about the door that was no longer open. It was closed now, she just had not heard it shut. Yemi did not come back to the 14th floor. Saint Maliya heard about the resignation, the way she heard about most things at KJ Group, quietly, through the particular channels through which office information always moved, arriving at her desk already fully formed. The chair was empty. The desk was cleared. 18 months of someone's presence reduced to a space that the floor was already learning to work around. Maliya sat with that for a long time. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She had braced for anger, had been carrying a low, careful version of it for weeks, the kind that lived just below the surface and made everything slightly harder to touch. But sitting there looking at the empty chair, what she felt instead was grief. Clean and real and uncomplicated by anything else. She grieved the girl at the orientation dinner. The hand extended across a table in a strange city. She grieved 2 coffees every morning, and the warm, easy laugh, and the specific comfort of feeling like someone was paying close attention to you because they cared about what they found. She let herself feel all of it because it deserved that. Because 18 months of closeness did not become nothing, just because it had also been something else. Both things were true. The warmth had been real. The damage had also been real. Yemi had loved her in the way that people love things they also want to control. Fully, until the moment it stopped serving them. Maliya understood that now. She was still sitting with it on Thursday evening when she got a message from Yemi. It was not long. It did not ask for anything. It said she was sorry. Not for the report, not for the anonymous message, not specifically for any single thing she had done. Just sorry, in the broad and slightly insufficient way people were sorry when they had done too much to name it all and not quite enough to repair it. It said she had not expected to become someone who did those things. It said she hoped Maliya would be okay. Maliya read it 3 times. She sat with the particular difficulty of receiving an apology that was genuine but not nearly large enough for what it was trying to cover. She thought about what Yemi had become. Not a monster, not a stranger, just a person who had wanted something badly enough to stop caring what it cost someone else. She had seen that want growing for months and had chosen not to look at it directly, and she understood now that looking away from things did not make them smaller. It just meant you were not watching when they became something you could no longer manage. She typed back slowly. She said she hoped Yemi would be okay too. She said she meant that. She said some things could not be undone, and that she needed Yemi to understand that this was one of them, not out of cruelty, but because pretending otherwise would not be honest, and they had both had enough of things that were not honest. She said she was glad they had been friends. She said goodbye. She put her phone face down on the desk and sat in the quiet of the 14th floor long after everyone else had gone home, and she let the chapter close. Not with a door slamming, not with anger, just with the quiet final click of something that had run its full course and was done. Then she picked up her bag and went home. Jun Seo came to find her on a Friday evening 3 weeks later. Not to the office, not through his assistant or a formal calendar invitation. He came to the lobby of her building at 7 in the evening with no particular explanation, and when she stepped out of the elevator and saw him standing there, no suit jacket, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had made a decision and was entirely comfortable with it, she stopped walking and just looked at him for a moment. She asked him what he was doing there. He said he wanted to take her somewhere that was not a masked club, and was not a corporate building, and was not anywhere that either of them had to be anything other than exactly what they were. She said that was a long way of asking if she was free. He said he supposed it was. She said, give her 10 minutes. She went back upstairs and stood in front of her mirror and did not spend very long looking at it because she was not performing for anyone tonight. She changed into something simple, not the burgundy dress, not the oversized work clothes, just something that was hers. And she went back downstairs and walked out of the lobby and fell into step beside him on the pavement, and Seoul opened up around them, loud and indifferent, and entirely beautiful. They walked for a while without deciding where they were going. That was new. The easy silence of it, the absence of agenda. At the club, there had always been the awareness of the room, the masks, the careful anonymity that made honesty feel safe, but also gave everything a slight edge of the temporary. This was different. This was just 2 people on a Friday evening, in a city that did not particularly care about them, and the not caring felt, for the first time, like freedom rather than erasure. He asked her how she was. She said she was better than she had expected to be. He asked about Yemi. She said she had said what needed to be said, and that she was learning how to let it be finished. She said grief did not mean you had made the wrong decision. She said sometimes it just meant something had genuinely mattered, and that was not a bad thing to have had, even when it ended the way it ended. He listened to all of that with the focused attention he brought to everything, and then he said she was remarkably clear-eyed about painful things. She said she had been invisible for a long time. She said invisible people learn to see clearly because nobody was ever watching them watch. He stopped walking. She stopped too and turned to look at him, and he was looking at her with that expression, the open one, the one that had no boardroom neutrality in it at all. And he said he needed her to know something. She waited. He said that the night at the club, the first night, he had crossed the room and sat beside her because something in him had recognized something in her before he had a single word of explanation for it. He said he had spent weeks in that room learning the shape of who she was and had come to understand that what he recognized was someone who had been asked by the world and by the people in it to make herself smaller for so long that she had almost forgotten she did not have to. He said he had given her a rule that first night because he had not wanted to share what they were building with anyone, and that he understood now that had been about more than the club, more than the masks, more than any of the convenient anonymity of that space. He said it had been about her specifically. He said he had spent enough of his life in rooms full of people who wanted things from him to understand the difference between being wanted for what you were and being wanted for what you controlled. He said she had never once looked at him like he was something to be acquired. He said that was everything. Maliya stood on a pavement in Seoul on a Friday evening and felt the full weight of being known land in her chest and stay there, not passing through, not dissolving, just settling into the permanent place where true things lived. She thought about the back of every elevator she had ever stood in, about earphones that were not playing anything, about performing presence for 8 hours and going home exhausted from the effort of it. She thought about a girl in a burgundy dress who had stood at the entrance of a room she had no business being in and felt for the first time a knot in her chest come loose. She thought about what it had taken to become someone who could stand here, on this pavement, in this city that had never cared about her, and feel completely, solidly, unperformatively at home in herself. She reached out and took his hand. He looked down at it, then up at her. And the small, controlled smile that she had been cataloging for months, the one that appeared at the edges of his mouth when she said or did something that surprised him, arrived, and this time it did not stay small. It opened into something fuller and quieter and entirely real. She said she was hungry. He laughed. Actually laughed. A brief, genuine sound that she had never once heard from him in a boardroom, and that she decided immediately she wanted to keep hearing for a very long time. He said there was a place 2 streets over. She said, "Lead the way." They walked into the city together, not the CEO and the invisible support staff, not the masked strangers in the amber light, not the complicated, entangled people on opposite sides of a secret. Just 2 people, fully themselves, on a Friday evening in Seoul. The city moved around them the way it always had. Loud, fast, indifferent. But Maliya was not looking for Seoul's approval anymore. She had stopped needing the city to notice her. She had someone beside her who already did.